Once again, we see the Bible doesn't stop with mere platitudes and happy thoughts. There are some cases in the scriptures wherein we find that there are some real problems between people. Deadly problems even. And we want to come back to this because Laban shows us how not to deliver a rebuke very clearly. So we're going to come back to this part by application at the end of our sermon here today. We've been talking about rebuke, perhaps an unpleasant task, if you will. But is it really? I was thinking about this. We said last week that the idea of a rebuke, and we'll talk about our definition here in a moment, but the idea of a rebuke, really behind it is the idea of setting things straight, setting things aright. I need a ruler to draw a straight line myself. You could say that my left hand, when I hold the ruler, rebukes my right hand because my right hand by itself is never going to draw a straight line. We need help here. We need something to set my right hand straight. It's called a ruler, and my right hand is never going to draw that straight line without that ruler. Can we begin to look at a rebuke that way? Can we begin to evaluate what the person says and just look at it and say, well, is this person correct or not? Can we do that? I certainly do that with the ruler, right? Do I have a real straight edge here, or do I have something else? So I evaluate. What's going to be helpful here? What is going to help me draw that straight line or a circle with a compass or whatever? Our sermon title, once again, Paul to Titus, sound faith begins with sharp rebuke. So look with me, if you would, at the book of Titus once again. So if you'll turn over to the book of Titus, and once again for our final sermon on this point, verses 10 through 14 of Titus, Paul instructing Titus what he's got to do with this mess, shall we say, here in Crete. For there are many insubordinate, both idle talkers and deceivers, especially those of the circumcision, whose mouths must be stopped, who subvert whole households, teaching things which they ought not, for the sake of dishonest gain. One of them, a prophet of their own, said, Cretans are always liars, evil beasts, lazy gluttons. This testimony is true. Therefore, rebuke them sharply, that they may be sound in the faith, not giving heed to Jewish fables and commandments of men who turn from the truth. So you can see that Paul has a method here of bringing truth and righteousness to the Cretans. We said before, we'll say it once again, that I believe that the verses that we have to really understand are contrasted in verses 12 of chapter 1 and verse 12 of chapter 2. We already read, one of them, a prophet of their own, said, Cretans are always liars, evil beasts, lazy gluttons. Contrast that with chapter 2 and verse 12, teaching us, this is the grace of God, teaching us that denying ungodliness and worldly lust, we should live soberly, righteously, and godly in this present age. And we've said before that this is a huge journey, is it not? We're going to go from lazy, evil people here to, let's see, denying ungodliness, worldly lust, living soberly, righteously, and godly in this present age. That's quite a journey, is it not? That's almost too much to hope for. Today, in our modern ideas, we would say that'll never happen. I hear this from time to time with people when they talk about the wonderful law word of God. I hear that. I say the law word of God is wonderful, it's beautiful, and I get, that'll never happen. Well, Paul's expecting it to happen here. And he even says the grace of God which has appeared to all. This grace of God can make it happen. It certainly isn't going to happen without the grace of God, that's for sure. So that is a theme that we've been discussing throughout our time of this sermon series. Our central idea has been that a rebuke must be for the right reasons, not the wrong reasons. And so we just want to go over some of what we talked about before, some quick review. Recall our definition of a rebuke from last week. What is a rebuke? I'm going to say that the difference between rebuke and advice is in the state of the hearer. Think about that for a moment, right? What's the real difference between rebuke and advice? What's the difference? Is it not in the state of the hearer? He can't tell me, you can't tell me, you can't tell me anything. I've heard that from folks. I've heard that recently. There are times, for example, when certain people in powerful positions don't want to hear it. You're not allowed to say anything. Well, the difference between rebuke and advice is in the state of the hearer. A rebuke is ultimately a statement that describes reality, a proper rebuke. Is that not what it is? A proper rebuke? It's a statement of reality. Don't believe me? I'll tell you when you will believe me. Here's when you will believe me if you don't. I know you do, but if there's any doubt, I'm going to illustrate. You're teaching your 16-year-old how to drive. There are moments when a sharp rebuke is necessary to keep people alive. It's not a time for a Freudian counseling session. It's not a time for sharing. It's a time for rebuke. Don't do that! Stop! I remember some specifics which I won't go into now. But I've been terrified in that situation. I have. Terrified. Thankfully, the Lord's goodness has been great, and I'm sure I terrified my own parents when I was learning to drive. But what's a rebuke in that situation? It's a statement of reality, right? If you don't do the right thing behind the wheel in this car right now, somebody could get killed. Reality. The aim of any properly dispensed rebuke is the good of the hearer, whether or not acknowledged as such. And there are times, like in the case I just talked about, it doesn't really matter in this moment. I'm teaching you how to drive, okay? I'm going to tell you the way it really is. You can't do what you just did. You have to stop here. You can't do that. And you know what? Right then, at that moment, from the rebuker to the rebuked, nobody really cares, at least the rebuker doesn't really care how the rebukee takes it. Oh, thank you so much for sharing that with me. I was hoping you would rebuke me. No, stop now, somebody's going to get killed. The aim of any properly dispensed rebuke is the good of the hearer, whether or not acknowledged as such. And we discussed meanings of the word rebuke. It's a really strong word, and especially here in Titus. And in fact, interestingly enough, the word that Titus uses is the stronger of the two words. And there's a couple of Greek words here that we're talking about here that we're discussing. And the weaker word actually is a word that kind of means like confirm or help, that kind of a thing. That's the word that was used when Peter took Christ aside and began to rebuke him about what Christ was saying. And then Christ came back at him. But this word rebuke here is a very strong word. To find fault, reprehend severely, chide, admonish, reprove, call to account, show one his fault. That's the word being used here in Titus. It's a very strong word here. Now, there's a couple other ways this word is used as well, and I want to give you some context of how this word is used. It's a strong word. From Ephesians 5:11, and have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather reprove them. Every year, as I mentioned before, we go to Lidditz, and we talk to folks about their wickedness. They need to turn to Christ. And the people that reprove us or rebuke us are generally not unbelievers, although we do get that. They're mostly believers. They need to know about Ephesians 5:11. We can't have fellowship with these wicked works of darkness. But it's not enough. See, don't you just wish that Paul would have stopped there? That would have just taken away our responsibility, right? Just stop, Paul. Have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness. Okay, I won't. But he has to go on and put the responsibility on us, doesn't he? But rather reprove them. That's a strong word. Same chapter. But all things are reproved, are made manifest by the light, for whatever doth make manifest is light. You know what Paul's saying right there? Without the reproof, without the rebuke, you won't know what is light and what is darkness. You ever think about that? You ever consider that at all? Without the idea of a reproof, of which Proverbs is full of those, that you'll never know what's right and what's wrong ever. If no one's ever allowed to reprove anyone else, how are you going to know what's right and wrong? How are you going to know how to live, how not to live? And here we go. Here's where we get the real uses of the word in Titus and in Timothy. Preach the word, says Timothy. It says Paul to Timothy, be instant in season, out of season, reprove, there's our word, rebuke or exhort with all long suffering and doctrine. Them that sin, also in Timothy, rebuke before all, that others may also fear. And then our chapter here in Titus chapter 1. Remember we talked before about verse 9, holding fast the faithful word as he has been taught. This is the elder now, that he may be able by sound doctrine both to exhort and convict, there's our word, those who contradict. So that word convict in verse 9 is the same word as rebuke down in verse 13. Therefore, this testimony is true, therefore rebuke them. And also, it's used an awful lot. Titus is the one that, or Paul to Titus uses this word by far the most in this very short book. You'll find this particular word used the most in the shortest amount of time, put it that way. And that's in chapter 2 and verse 15. Speak these things, exhort and rebuke with all authority. Let no one despise you. I think Paul, what he's doing here is he is telling Titus, you must do this. Because I think Titus is no different from the rest of us, no different from me. Hey, Paul, can we have there's got to be a better way to address these problems. Can we just have a little softer approach around here? Please. Can this be a little bit easier? I mean, I get out of bed, I just think, all the mess we have here, it seems like I'll be rebuking everybody all day. And Paul is underlying what has to happen in order for sound doctrine, in order for these people to grow up, in order for them to begin to live godly lives. Titus, it's not going to happen without rebuke. Titus. Of course, we all wish it could be different. And from last week, 5 aspects of rebuke. We said it relates to and encourages life. We talked about God's rebuke right in the middle of Genesis chapter 3. We're talking about life, and the rebuke is in the middle of it. We talked about the fact that the value of a rebuke is not measured by the reaction of the rebuked. And we talked about Jehoshaphat's invitation to the northern 10 tribes to come and participate in a Passover. And what he had to say, he said, don't be like your fathers who were stiff-necked. Don't be like them. And a lot of them didn't like the way he talked to them. They laughed at it. They didn't like the attitude with which that rebuke was given. But that did not diminish the value of the rebuke. And then we talked about this. A warm relationship between the parties is not a necessary prerequisite. We hear this all the time. And we used various examples. Peter in Acts chapter 2. Stephen in Acts 7. Paul on Mars Hill. John to Herod. Christ to Nicodemus in John chapter 3. Elijah to Ahab. And we didn't talk about this one. But listen to what Paul says. How's this for how to win friends and influence people? You ready for this? Paul in Galatians. I don't know. You can evaluate what I'm saying. I don't think this passage is making it into Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. See what you think. Oh, foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you that you should not obey the truth, before whose eyes Jesus Christ has been evidently set forth, crucified among you? This only would I learn of you. Received ye the Spirit by the works of the law, or by the hearing of faith? Are you so foolish, having begun in the Spirit, are you now made perfect by the flesh? 3 verses, Paul addressing them as fools and foolish in 3 short verses here. Now, we're not sure exactly what kind of relationship he had before. Who knows what kind of relationship he had after? But he said what needed to be said to these folks. We didn't look at this last week, and so here we'll pick up. Per the Bible, the receiver of the rebuke is far more responsible than the giver. I want you to consider that, please. In our culture, it's the opposite of that, is it not? Our culture is how you talk to me. I'm justified in my response by how you talk to me. And what you're saying might be entirely true, but you said it in the wrong spirit, and that's why we just love that word, mean-spirited, right? Hear it all the time. I don't know exactly what mean-spirited means, but it's kind of like one of those general catch-all words. It's bad, whatever it was. Not sure what it was, but it's wrong, so I don't have to listen to you. But turn with me, if you would, to Isaiah chapter 5. I want you to understand this. Isaiah chapter 5 and verse 24. Isaiah 5:24. Therefore, Isaiah's talking judgment here. Well, let's start with verse 22, sorry. Woe to men mighty at drinking wine, woe to men valiant for mixing intoxicating drink, who justify the wicked for a bribe and take away justice from the righteous man. And woe, when you see the word woe in the Bible, we're talking about a curse here. That's what we're talking about. Isaiah is pronouncing a curse on these people. Therefore, verse 24, as a fire devours the stubble, and the flame consumes the chaff, so the root will be as rottenness, and their blossom will ascend like dust. Why? Because they have rejected the law of the Lord of hosts, and despised the word of the Holy One of Israel. They despise his word. They've rejected his law. They were to respond properly. And we don't get into a big discussion of whether or not Isaiah had the right attitude when he delivered it. They've rejected the law of the Lord. That's all there is to this, at least in this verse right here. They had the law of the Lord. They had his word, and they didn't like it. And this is what's going to happen to them as a result. And kids and everybody, especially kids here today, you know why you get rebuked by your parents? One good reason. Because if you don't listen to the rebuke of your parents, guess what? Something worse is going to happen to you. It's going to be a lot worse than this rebuke that you're getting from your parents today. It doesn't feel good, and maybe your parents have had to, because you did not obey them the first time, maybe they have had to add some extra motivation, which you really didn't appreciate. But guess what? These people rejected the law of the Lord. Do you see what's going to happen to them? Let's read that again. They've rejected this rebuke, and things are not going to improve. What happens? Therefore, as the fire devours the stubble, and the flame consumes the chaff, so their root will be as rottenness, and their blossom will ascend like dust, because they've rejected the law of the Lord of hosts and despised the word of the Holy One of Israel. Okay, it's a little painful to appreciate that rebuke, perhaps, but it's ultimately a good thing. It's setting you straight. But because you decided you had a better idea and you didn't want to listen to that word, this is what's going to happen to your future. It's going to be a disaster. It's not going to support and sustain you. Per the Bible, the receiver of the rebuke is far more responsible than the giver. I really want to emphasize that point, because our culture today says the exact opposite on every level. The opposite on every level. And sadly, the church has gone along with it. And I don't know if we churchmen have realized that the further we go down this path, the less we're allowed to preach the Word of God. Have you noticed that? Have you noticed this? Oh, yeah, you know, and I see churchmen kind of apologize. Yeah, you know, we haven't always treated people the right way, and just backing off and back. Okay, now there's a news flash, right? We haven't always treated people the right way. Oh, thank you for that insight. I think we already knew that, but it's just a statement, just backing down and backing down and backing down. Well, we'll back down enough, and pretty soon, whatever we say will be out of bounds because we don't like your attitude or whatever. Another problem with that is we don't read the prophets anymore. Look at the way they talked. Look at the things those folks had to say. Look at the results if you want to be result-oriented. They didn't get all of that hot results most of the time. A couple times they did. At least one of the times when they got the results, they didn't want the results. There with Jonah. Jonah would have been happier if God would have lit up the entire Ninevite city. The receiver of the rebuke is far more responsible than the giver. We must understand this. And in understanding this, we're against not only secular pagan culture, we're going against what passes for Christian culture today in most circles. Number 5, all who heed the word of the Lord will benefit, those who know Christ and those who don't. Now, I wanted to include this because there are people saying all the time, well, we can't expect the unbelievers. Have you heard this? We can't expect the unbelievers to obey God. You can't be talking to them. Well, if they obey God, they'll benefit. Aside from their eternal relationship with him. I said eternal relationship with him. Check this out. Look with me at Exodus chapter 9. I want you to see this. I want to see the benefit of people who were not Israelites obeying God. Look at this. Exodus chapter 9. We're in the middle of the plagues here. Things are not going well for Pharaoh or for many of the Egyptians. However, they kind of catch a break here. Let's start with verse 16 here. Moses is going to be speaking to Pharaoh eventually. He says, "But indeed for this purpose I've raised you up, that I may show my power in you, that my name may be declared in all the earth. As you exalt yourself against my people, and that you will not let them go. Behold, tomorrow about this time I will cause the very heavy hail to rain down, such as not been in Egypt since its founding until now. Therefore send now and gather your livestock and all that you have in the field, for the hail shall come down on every man and every animal which is found in the field, and is not brought home, and they shall die." Now look at this next. Look what it says here. "He who feared the word of the Lord among the servants of Pharaoh made his servants and his livestock flee to the houses. But he who did not regard the word of the Lord left his servants and his livestock in the field." You see what's happening here? They're servants of Pharaoh. They're not part of the children of Israel. But they heeded the word of the Lord, and it benefited them. So these dear people that want to say, you can't tell people that because they don't believe it. Well, I'm sure some people didn't believe, but some people did, and they saved their livestock alive. The word of the Lord was not limited right here to the children of Israel. It was to whoever would obey it. And we need to proclaim it to everyone. We don't know who's going to obey, who's not going to obey, but we can't go by this idea of let's do this litmus test first to see if they believe the Bible, and you're only allowed to talk to the people who believe the Bible. Everybody else is out of bounds. No. The servants of Pharaoh, by this time they had a little respect. Little respect. They said, you know what? This is like the 5th plague or whatever it was. I think it's time maybe to pay attention to the word of the Lord. Sounds like hail's coming. So far, Moses is 4 for 4 in his predictions. Let's do the prudent thing here. So, that is another problem we have, I believe, in our modern church. You're only allowed to talk to the people who already believe the Bible. Now, the word of the Lord is not limited. It's for everybody. It's just as true, whether they believe it or not. So the servants of Pharaoh who believed the word of God benefited. All who heed the law word of God will benefit. Now, we began this sermon last week, so we want to get to our application here. And just a couple points of application before we get back to Laban there in the book of Genesis. Number one, 3 points of application here. Number one, all believe in rebuke. If you don't believe that, check with the French Revolution. You don't even have to check with any tyrannical regime. If you get a chance sometime, it's very hard reading and very difficult. But look at the self-justification seminars, whatever you call them, self-flagellating seminars the communists made their people go through all the time. How to get up in front of people and rebuke themselves. And everybody else would sit around and evaluate whether or not they had sufficiently rebuked themselves. Oh, does that sound a little bit like what we got going on today? I'm so sorry for my whiteness. What do I have to do to be accepted back in the beloved if I just decry my whiteness enough? And some of these same people come back and say, you're not allowed to preach. You're not allowed to say those things. You're not allowed to rebuke. Bro, all you guys do is rebuke. The difference is we have a means of pleasing God through his son. We have a means of ending it. You don't have a means of doing that. And it's hard reading. If you get a chance to read those communist countries when you had to stand up in front of the whole village and talk about what a rotten person you've been. And it was never quite good enough. Everybody believes in rebuke. Remember the French Revolution slogan? Liberty, fraternity, equality. Sounds wonderful. Sounds like a place I want to be. Liberty, eternity, fraternity, equality. Yay! But you might recall the last 2 words. What were they, Conrad? Or death. There you go. You better believe in liberty, whatever that means, and fraternity, whatever that means, and equality, whatever that means, or you can die. And we're the ones that are the rebuke meisters? Are you kidding me? Secondly, number 1, all believe in rebuke. Number 2, we are now a nation of abject fools. On what basis can I say that? I have a solid foundation for saying that. Look with me, if you would, at Ecclesiastes chapter 7. I hope you remember this. I mean, we say, I hope you remember this, hope you remember everything, but remember this, please. Ecclesiastes chapter 7. Ecclesiastes 7, verse 5. It is better to hear the rebuke of the wise than for a man to hear the song of fools. I'm going to go out on a limb here, but I think it's a pretty solid limb. We are a nation who loves the song of fools, who hates the rebuke of the wise. That's us. Solomon in Ecclesiastes has us nailed right here. He's got us. We're all about the song of fools. It's feel good, feels wonderful. The rebuke of the wise, want nothing to do with it. It is better to hear the rebuke of the wise than for man to hear the song of fools. We love the song of fools. And what are you if you love the song of fools? You're a fool yourself. This idea of the rebuke is so foreign to us, we hate it so much. We'd rather be fools. Let's be honest. Finally then, our rebuking must be about setting things right or rightly. So let's go back to one of my best buds, Laban, in Genesis chapter 31, as we wrap up here this morning. Laban. I will admit to you very freely that I am a hater when it comes to Laban. It seems like every time that guy shows up, there's something wrong going on here. And what's more annoying, I won't stay on this too much, but I get annoyed with people who call Jacob the schemer and ignore Laban. You want a schemer? Check out Laban. How does Laban get a free pass all the time from everybody? Anyway, all right, I don't want to preach that sermon this morning. But let's look at this. John read it for us here this morning. You know what's happening here. Jacob has been treated horribly by Laban. You might have seen there, if you notice that, Jacob said twice, he said, your father has changed my wages 10 times. He said that to his daughters. They didn't argue with him. But if there's any doubt, he actually said it later to Laban. And Laban didn't argue with him that he had done that to him. Didn't argue with what he had put up with him. Didn't argue with how hard Jacob had worked for Laban over this time. But I want you to see just how not, shall we say, to deliver a rebuke. And I want to spend a little bit of time on this as my last point of application, just a little bit of time, because what Laban does here is what we're all tempted to do. And we need to resist this temptation for sure. So Jacob is told by God, the angel of God, and says, lift up your eyes now, see all the rams, sprinkled, speckled, and so forth. This is verse 12. And then he says, I'm the God of Bethel, where you anointed the pillar and where you made a vow to me. Now arise, get out of this land, and return to the land of your family. Now just very briefly here, God says he's going to protect him, or God will protect him, but Jacob at this point doesn't quite know how that's going to happen. And he knows he's dealing with a real scheming man who is not, he knows he's dealing with Laban. By now, trust me, it's been 20 years, and Jacob knows exactly who Laban is, no guessing. And you can see the fear here with Jacob. He knows he could be in trouble, but he obeys God, and he gets up, and he leaves. Verse 22. Laban was told on the third day that Jacob had fled, and he took his brethren with him and pursued him for 7 days' journey, and he overtook him in the mountains of Gilead. But God had come to Laban the Syrian in a dream by night and said to him, be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad. Okay, so now Laban has this word from God. Don't you mess with Jacob. Well, this does work out, but look how Laban handles this. I want you to see this. Laban is he is such a disgusting thing. Look at verse 26. Laban said to Jacob, he overtakes him, and he says, what have you done that you have stolen away, unknown to me, and carried away my daughters like captives, taken with the sword? Now, that's not what happened, because they had said, back in verses 14 and 15, or verse 15, are we not considered strangers by him? He has sold us. He's made merchandise of us. He's gotten money out of us. How did he do it? He got all that 14 years of labor from Jacob for free for his daughters. They know what's going on. And here's Laban. Oh, yeah, you've stolen away carried away my daughters like captives taken with the sword. What a stinker. The captives were in his house. They'd rather be with Jacob than with him. But it gets worse. Why'd you flee away secretly and steal away from me and not tell me? Look at this. This stinker. Verse 27. For I might have sent you away with joy and songs, with timbrel and harp. Jacob must have been a man of great restraint at that moment for not slapping him for saying something like that. Sometimes, though, that's the best thing to do when someone's just lying to your face just like that. You really need some restraint. But look, I think it gets even worse. And you did not allow me to kiss my sons and my daughters. Now you've done foolishly in this thing. And here's the thing. It is in my power to do you harm, but the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, be careful that you do not speak to Jacob neither good nor bad. And that's where I want to focus briefly on this. Laban can't take a rebuke, and he can't give one either. He has to say to Jacob, look, the only reason why I'm not killing you right now is because God told me not to, but I could, and I have the ability to do it, but I'm not going to do it. We must steer clear of speaking that kind of a way when delivering a rebuke. You deserve worse right now, but I'm restrained because I'm such a good person. You see what's happening here? He's setting himself as the good guy here, right in the middle of it. I'm a good person. Jacob, you might think I'm a bad guy, but know that I'm a good person. You know why? I'm going to tell you why I'm a good person, because I don't kill you right now, and the only reason is because God told me not to, otherwise I would. This is a temptation that we have, a temptation of piling things on and making ourselves look better rather than just trying to fix the situation right then and there. Let's go back to the driving illustration. We're driving and the 16-year-old does something that you think is dangerous. Whatever it is, you're terrified. That's not the time for a lecture about how good driver you are. Because if the person who taught you how to drive was there, that person might have a little more extra perspective there. Now see, the purpose of a rebuke here is to set things aright. But the problem is we have a temptation when we do that to somehow make ourselves look better rather than just dealing with the situation right then and there. How do we set this thing right? That's what we really want to do. But oh no, Laban has to get all personal about it. And he has to get that little jab into Jacob. I really am a good guy. You might think I'm a good person, bad person, but I'm a really good guy. How do I know? Because they don't kill you. What a guy. So those 3 points of application, and we're going to move on from this passage here in Titus. But since the word is used so often, 3 times in the book twice in the first chapter, as we mentioned, and once in the second chapter, we really needed to talk about this. And I hope that we would be a people, as I've mentioned before, who would both know how to deliver a rebuke, but perhaps more important, know how to receive one.